It's working?
I think we continue 121.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We're getting ready for Pesach. So the truth is, we talked a little bit about this custom of not eating kitniot. Makes everybody very angry. How can they eat it? Well, we can't. How dare they? If we don't, exactly. It becomes a real fight. And there are situations in which the Ashkenazi rabbi said, it's only a custom, and therefore it's not chametz, as we said, and therefore when there's extenuating circumstances, you can be lenient. I said to you the other day that I gave a heter to somebody to eat kitniot this year after 60 years or 70 years they haven't been eating kitniot, but now their diet changed, they have some dietary concerns, and therefore in some countries, if there's a famine, if there's a drought, and you won't have what to eat, if you don't have kitniot, then it makes a lot of sense. Some people say you should be very careful to, of course, check the grains beforehand to make sure there's no mixing, like we talked about. Also, children. My kid, my eldest, now she's 28. When she was like 3 years old, she was addicted to bamba. Heard of bamba? Yeah. Bamba, it's a kid's snack. It's made of...
Kids.
It's a snack, very popular, most popular snack, I think, in Israel, for kids. Kids, yes. And what's it made out of? Peanuts.
Corn.
So, peanuts and corn, right. So both of them really shouldn't be in the original prohibition to not partake of kitniot. They're not legumes, but over the years the custom developed that those are also most communities prohibit peanuts and prohibit corn, and therefore we don't eat it. But my young daughter, she was a little kid, and she, we didn't have anything to replace it, so we actually fed her kitniot. We fed her bamba.
Did you hear there was a study that was done like 10 or so years ago about comparing Ashkenazim in America versus Ashkenazim in Israel, and they found that Ashkenazim in America had significantly higher rates of peanut allergies, and the reason why it was so much lower in Israel was attributed to the fact that bamba is fed to children at a very young age here in Israel.
Interesting. I mean, I thought there's just more peanuts and everything in America, and I thought that would have an effect. But you're saying specifically the young age of peanuts consumption. Fascinating. Okay, so we are preparing for Pesach, as we said. I know it's over a month before, but since we don't have classes from Rosh Chodesh on, so we have less than a month to get ready for Pesach. We're going to skip chapter 10 here, because chapter 10 we're learning about in the other class. There's a class on halacha, where we're talking about kosher in the kitchen. So we're really going to go through all those laws over there. So we go straight now to chapter 12, and we get to the Shalom. We go to chapter 12.
Yeah,
all good. Thank you. The laws of matzah. We mentioned up till now we've been talking about chametz. Chametz umatzah, the opposites, and we saw that there's actually 4 mitzvot in the Torah about chametz, 3 negative commandments, 1 positive. What could be a positive commandment about chametz?
Positive to remove the chametz.
To destroy it, exactly. To search and destroy. We do that mitzvah. Usually, the rabbi said you should do it with a candle. The night before Pesach, b'dikat chametz. It's quite magical. It's a magical moment. But those weeks of scouring the house and searching for every crumb, not as magical. Can be quite painful or laborious. But on the other hand, there's always 2 sides of the coin. On the other hand, for a lot of yeshiva students, it's a big income, right? They can go get a job helping somebody clean their house, and people wait for it all year round. For this, yeah, I think the prices go up too. Supply and demand. In any case, that's let's assume we did everything right. We did all the different stages. We did cleaning, and then we did bdika with the candle, right? And then we said the bitul, the statement which we, with our minds, nullify whatever chametz that we didn't find. And then the next morning we burn whatever we did find, and then we nullify again everything, whether it was we found it or we didn't find it, we nullify doubly, and then we're all done. We got rid of every type of chametz, every type of mixture that might have chametz in it, and we talked about even in some cosmetics, maybe. And so, do you have to worry about chametz in mixtures of various sorts? And we even got rid of the kitniot, which are not chametz, but the custom in most Ashkenazi communities is to not partake of, roughly translated as legumes. But as we were saying just before, it got expanded a little bit. It's not quite a botanical definition, kitniot. But it is that's the custom. And so we got rid of all the rice. And if you're really careful, you got rid of even the oils made from kitniot, unless they're special oils, which your rabbi said are okay. And you are free from chametz. Now we move to the other side. The other side is the mitzvah to eat matzah. Let's take a look. The mitzvah to eat matzah. When is the mitzvah to eat matzah? When do we eat matzah?
Seder night.
Seder night? That's it?
Yeah. The whole week.
The whole week.
Of course.
Right. So who's right? You're both right. It's complicated. There's the actual biblical commandment to eat the matzah, the way the oral tradition interprets it, devolves upon you. And we say a bracha when we do a mitzvah. It's like you put on tefillin, you make a bracha. You put on tzitzit, you make a bracha. You hear the shofar, you make a bracha. Whenever you do a mitzvah, you say a bracha. When do we say a bracha on the matzah? Asher kitchanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat matzah. The first night of Pesach. Only the first night of Pesach. After that, you're going to eat matzah, not just because you're hungry, maybe because it's even a mitzvah, especially on Shabbat. You're supposed to have meals with bread. You don't have bread. What's the bread of the week? Matzah. So you have 3 meals with matzah. You're going to make hamotzi lechem min haaretz. That's your bread. But you will not be making a bracha on the mitzvah to eat matzah. That's only on the first night. There is another opinion. We're going to see it. That it's a unique opinion. People always like to quote it. It's quoted in the name of the Gra, Gaon Rabbi Eliyahu from Vilna. He lived, believe it or not, only 250 years ago, but he was really special, such a genius and such a unique flash of special Torah insight that he's known as the Gaon, the genius, the Gaon. Sometimes you don't even say his name. Just say, the Gaon said. It's been 250 years. When they say genius, sometimes they call me a genius, but no, if you say only the genius, the Gaon, it goes to Rabbi Eliyahu from Vilna, that was his name. I forget his family name, Eliyahu something. They didn't have family names as commonly there. I forget. There is a name, but I can't remember it right now. The acronym often used is? Yafeh. The Vilna Gaon is the Gaon from Vilna, and the acronym is GRA, Gaon Rabbi Eliyahu, Gimel Reish Aleph. Anyways, he said a fascinating twist. He said there is a mitzvah when you eat matzah on the second day, on the third day, on the fourth day, on the seventh day of Pesach, all the week, you fulfill a mitzvah. It's just that you don't have to. You have to eat matzah, even if you don't like matzah. You have to eat matzah on the first night of the Pesach, of the Seder night, right? Because then it's an active commemoration of the Exodus. This is the bread, we'll talk about why, but this is the bread that the Jewish people ate when they left Egypt, and there's a lot of similar... Zalman? I don't think so. That's a private name. Eliyahu Zalman what?
Rabbi Eliyahu ben Shlomo Zalman.
Shlomo Zalman is his father's name.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Shlomo Zalman is his father's name. Kramer, I believe, is his name. You'll find that in a different site that's probably a little more in-depth. As I said, I think Kramer was his actual family name. But anyways, back to our topic. He suggested that there is a category of mitzvah which is very unique, it's not absolute. It's called not a mitzvah chiyuvit, but a mitzvah kiyumit. It means that if you fulfill it, if you do the action, you get credit as if you did a mitzvah. But it's not that you're obligated to do the mitzvah. You could say it's almost like chesed. Every chesed that you do, every good deed, every loving kindness, you give some tzedakah. It's a mitzvah. Give another coin. It's another mitzvah. Help another old lady across the street. It's another mitzvah. Right? You smile at your friend. Make him feel good. Good morning. Good morning, Shua. How are you? Good. Good. So I did a mitzvah. But it's not that each one, if I didn't do it, I'd be not fulfilling, there's no specific definition of how many times you have to smile at your friend or help a little old lady across the street or how many coins of tzedakah you have to give or how often. The more you do, the more mitzvot you get, but you don't have to do a specific regimented amount of them. Same thing, he says, with the mitzvah of matzah. The first night, everybody agrees. You have to eat one piece of matzah. We're going to talk about it. What happens if you can't? You're sick. You have a hard time swallowing matzah. You can't stand the stuff. You identify, huh? You only have to force yourself to eat that piece of matzah for the mitzvah, for the first night. And we'll talk about how to deal with it. You can crumble it up, whatever. Try to make it easier to swallow, unless you really are exempt. Like my daughter, she doesn't eat matzah. My daughter, could you believe it? Tens of years of Jewish school, and this is what comes out of her. Doesn't eat matzah on Seder night. Can you imagine such a thing? Why does she do that?
She's gluten-free.
That's it. She's celiac. She's celiac. It's dangerous for her to eat matzah. If it's to do something dangerous, it overrides the mitzvot of the Torah, all of them except for the big three, right? We talked about that. So, but in most cases, you force yourself to eat the piece of matzah. But on the rest of the days, there's a lower level of obligation, like I said, to have a meal. On Shabbat and on Yom Tov, 2 meals, 3 meals, we define a meal by bread. If possible, you eat bread. But if you can't, it's not like you're violating any obligation. Whereas the Gra says, it's true you're not going to be violating an obligation, but if you do have bread, the special bread called matzah, if you do have matzah, for all 7 days, each time you eat the matzah, you're fulfilling a mitzvah. So I have a son. It's the opposite of his sister. He eats lots of matzah. It's almost the only thing he eats, really. We force him to eat some meat, some chicken, some potatoes, But he wants to eat matzah and only matzah. Why? Because he knows this opinion of the Gra, that each time you eat a piece of matzah, you get another. What more do you want in life than to do more mitzvot? Wow. It's so exciting. It's so special. So he's always trying to eat matzah, more matzah, and more matzah. And I say, hey, take some salad. Here's some ice cream, just anything. But no, he only wants matzah. But we'll find the middle ground somewhere between my daughter and my son, and we'll figure it out. Okay, that's an introduction about something. Before we actually go inside, we're going to read some of the book about the laws of matzah. Moshe, you wanted to comment something, a question?
I had a question. I can ask it at the end.
It's going to come later, because okay, fine, no problem. Okay, we're going to open up. This is a book we're using. It's a great book by Rav Melamed called The Laws of Pesach. We're in chapter 12 now, page 163. Okay, Renan is here in order to read for us. We're so glad you came. Otherwise, there'd be silence now. The people would be wondering, is the video working? What's wrong? If somebody pushed the mute, we would just say, Renan's not here. We don't have a reader. But now you're here, so Baruch Hashem, you'll read for us.
The mitzvah of eating matzah. It is a Torah commandment to eat matzah on the night of the 15th of the month of Nisan. As it says, in the evening you shall eat matzah. Shemot 12:18. Even to the Torah also says, you shall eat matzot for 7 days. Shemot 12:15. The sages inferred, based on the rules for interpreting the Torah, that the Torah does not mean to command us to eat matzot all 7 days, but rather that matzah is the staple food that we eat on Pesach instead of bread. However, one who wants to live off fruits, vegetables, meat, and dairy products may do so.
So just to comment that, of course, you understand there's a contradiction in the Torah. Torah says one pasuk, you should eat the matzah on the evening of the night of the 15th. Another pasuk says you should eat matzah for 7 days. So which is it? So here we have the idea that we have the oral Torah. We have a tradition. The rabbis have been dealing with this text. Oh, you think here in the year 2022, you think you're the first one to think of that? Oh, there's a contradiction in the Torah. Reading the Torah with a fine-tooth comb, mining the depths of the text and the tradition, this is what the great sages are often known as Chazal, Chachamenu, Zichronam Livracha. This is what they did and what they've been doing for thousands of years. So this text has been mulled over, and the traditional conclusion reached. As I said, believe it or not, even 250 years ago, there was a nuance added by the Gra, but the standard tradition is the way it's been described now, that the conclusion is it's only an obligation to eat the matzah on the first night. The rest of the 7 days, when the Torah says you should eat matzah, it didn't really mean it. You should eat matzah, not bread.
Right.
That's what it meant. But not that you have to eat matzah. It's voluntary. If you want to eat matzah, you can. If you want to eat the fruit, you can. Okay, keep going. Renan, second paragraph.
The full meaning of this is that the one who eats Matsuot all 7 days of Pesach does not thereby fulfill a mitzvah. This is what the saints mean when they say Psachim 120. That eating matzah during the 7 days is voluntary. We should. Yet many leading halachic authorities have written that although eating matzah is obligatory only at the Seder, and indeed that is why the Savior instituted the special blessing over the eating of matzah at the Seder only. Nevertheless, one who eats matzah on the other days of Pesach is to fulfill a mitzvah, even if it's not obligatory. In this view, the sages refer to eating matzah on the remaining days of Pesach as a reshut, only by way of contrast with the obligation to eat matzah on the night of the 15th. According to this view, the verse "You shall eat matzot for 7 days" retains its simple meaning. This is how Ibn Ezra and Iskuni explain the verse. This is
12th century, 13th centuries. We see this discussion throughout the ages. From the 7th century to now we jump to the 12th and 13th. And I mentioned to you that it's the Gra from 250 years ago. So throughout the ages, different readings of this verses have been proposed. Go ahead.
This is implied by a statement by Rosh, and this was the practice of the Vionagon. However, even they maintain that the mitzvah consists of eating a kizait, a milk of matzah at each meal, and that eating more does not add to the mitzvah.
I should tell that to my son. Now the question is, how big is a kazait? We'll get to that. Sorry, the size of an olive?
No, I heard it was olives. Kazait, based on Torah measurement, was different. So,
right.
It was supposed to be about a fistful.
Oh, a fistful. Wow, that's a big olive. That's a big olive. Never seen an olive like that. So you're right. There is a big debate about it because, we're reading really ancient texts, and the truth is a lot of the debate about it came when people were learning from the texts and not from live experience. I think I mentioned to you that the Jewish communities in Europe for hundreds of years, the Baalei HaTosafot, who analyzed and interpreted the Gemara, many of them had never seen an olive in their life. It seems quite clear. And therefore they tried to calculate the size of an olive from the different sources and comparing it to an egg. But then, of course, there's different sizes of eggs. So it's quite a complicated. And then there's you translate the measurements of thumbs, and so there's volume, and we're going to get to it. There's a discussion about how much matzah actually you have to eat on the first night of the Seder as an obligation. How do we define an olive's worth. Many poskim, believe it or not, and this is coming to light more and more in recent years, many poskim, what are poskim? People who paskin. Very well said. What is to paskin?
To come to a conclusion on a halachic question.
Very good. The best translation that we have of that is decisors. No, it's not that thing that's in the back of your teeth. That's an incisor. A decisor, somebody who decides the halacha. A rabbi who gives a psak. Paskins comes from a psak, means a decision, a halachic decision. So the poskim, many more and more are realizing that, believe it or not, the size of an olive is probably close to the size of an olive.
Wow.
Back to basics, you know what I'm saying? Although we're machmir, we eat much more than that, you know. Yes, please, Amos.
But if they never saw the olive, how they describe the amount in the past?
So, as I said, from comparison, there are comparisons in the texts between olives and eggs, and olives and thumbs, and olives and other things, and so they tried to calculate how much it would mean in the whatever the current weight system was. Nowadays, we'll measure in grams, or some people say it's a question of volume, so you measure in milliliters. So there's a long discussion about this. As I was saying, more and more, although the custom is, especially when it comes to a Torah law, to be machmir. Should try to eat a little more than just the size of an olive, just to be safe. But we're going to see that discussion. But the mitzvah to eat matzah is not just to eat a piece of matzah. I see a piece of matzah in the store, take it, have a bite. As long as you look on the clock, okay, it's the 15th of Nisan, you look on the calendar, hey, I'll eat the piece of matzah. I'll make a bracha, and I'll eat the piece of matzah. Not so fast. Why? Because there are conditions. What is considered to be matzah, that's kosher? You thought there was a question about what it is an olive. What is a matzah? And there are rules that the Torah gives us about how to make matzah, what constitutes matzah, specifically matzah for the night of the Seder. I have in my house less and less every year, but I have most houses have matzah, special matzah for the first night, and then regular matzah for the rest of the week, which gives expression to the fact that what we just said, that according to most poskim, the obligation really is on the first night in a positive way. You must eat a piece of matzah, and we're going to be more strict about the requirements. Whereas the rest of the week, you don't really have to eat matzah at all, so you can be more lenient about the different criteria for what constitutes kosher for Pesach matzah. Have you ever seen in the store? I've seen it. Matzah box that says on it, not kosher for Pesach. Have you seen that?
Really?
Yeah. Some people like the crackers, and they just make them, but they're not. We'll see what does it mean to make matzah kosher for Pesach. You've seen it. Yeah, me too. Yeah, it says on it very big. Yeah, chametz. Don't get confused. Yeah.
What's the difference between the special matzah on the 15th and the matzot the rest of the week?
Excellent. I'm so glad you asked. That's exactly what we're going to learn about right now in the next paragraph. Ravid, why don't you read? No, they both need 18 minutes. He's asking about the night of the Seder and the whole week. Still has to be within 18 minutes. So what's the difference between them?
Right.
Please read for us. Section 2. Page 164.
Shmuel Matzah, the Torah states, and you shall observe the matzot. The sages interpreted this to mean that the matzah must be avoided from becoming chametz. This refers especially to the matzot eaten on the Seder night in fulfillment of the mitzvah for the very next verse states, in the evening you shall eat matzot. The other matzot one eats on Pesach are like any other food. They may be eaten as long as there is no concern that they may have become chametz. However, we have been commanded to guard carefully the matzah used for the mitzvah on Seder night from becoming chametz. Such matzah is called shmura matzah.
Okay, so that's the difference. Shmura matzah often is more expensive than the regular matzah. They both have no chametz in them. But there's an extra guarding which is done on what we call shmura matzah, or in Hebrew, matzah shmura, in English, shmura matzah. Special guarding, and that raises the cost of the labor of the people, and so everything. It says on the package, matzah shmura, and the other ones just say matzah.
Didn't we learn that after matzah is baked, it cannot become chametz?
True. We're talking about guarding it before it's baked.
It's 18 minutes.
Before that. 18 minutes is when you take the flour and you put it together with the water.
Yes. Before that, it cannot become chametz.
Sure it can. You have a kernel of wheat and you pour water on it, it'll start to expand and become chametz. Even before it's flour.
If you have the flour, how can it become chametz? Like just by if it's open. If it's open, okay.
Yeah. Water gets into any step. No, not machmir at all. This is really chametz. You can have. We talked before about kernels that are left in water. They're going to ferment and start the leavening process. Obviously, you won't have delicious bread out of a kernel of wheat, but the process of fermentation begins.
As long as the flour is in the package, it cannot become in contact.
Do you think flour grows in a plastic bag? Where does it come from? There are many stages in the process. At every stage along the process, you have to make sure no water gets in. So once it's already been packaged in a very seal-tight, vacuum-packed plastic bag, you're right, no danger. Although there could be a hole in the bag. But how did it get there? It had to. What do? How do you get to flour that's in the plastic bag? Before you grind it, what do you have to do? You have to harvest it. First of all, it grows in the... Now, every stalk of wheat has lots of water on it. Otherwise, it wouldn't grow. Right? Where does the water come from? It rains. It rains. That's why we pray for rain in the day when the farmers... That's how they wouldn't have bread to eat the rest of the year if it didn't rain. And so there's lots of rain. Wait, isn't that chametz? No. So obviously, this process of leavening doesn't happen until it's cut off from the stem, until it's cut off from the ground. If it's still connected to the ground, it will never become chametz. It still has it's still alive. It's still alive. The moment you cut it off, though, any drop of liquid could cause it to become chametz. So you have to guard it. Now, the truth is, you have to guard it from the moment of ketzirah, it's called. Ketzirah, harvest. Most matzah that we eat is not guarded from the moment of ketzirah, because you can look at the grains and see, did they get water or not? And if they got water, you take them out before you grind those wheat berries into flour. So most matzah, kosher for Pesach matzah, is when you guard it from the moment of techina, from grinding the wheat berries into flour. Then they watch it, and that's most matzot. And then, of course, 18 minutes, and that's the standard matzah. But for the first night, the mitzvah to eat matzah, because there's a special Torah verse which says, Ushmaltem et ha-matzot. What word does that look like to you? Shomer, good. Shmura, very good. That's Ushmartem. What do you have at the gate of the yeshiva, at the door? A shomer, right. Ushmartem. So you've got a guard that, it doesn't become et. Matzot, right? So that's the reading. That's the way we read the Torah. And what does it mean? You should guard the matzot. Guarding. So we're going to see the details in just a minute. I just like to point out to you, matzot could also is a plural of matzah. Very good. But if you didn't know what the nekudot were, you could read it mitzvot. And guard, you should guard or keep the mitzvot. should keep all the mitzvot.
Maybe that's a true meaning.
Maybe that?
Maybe that's a true meaning.
It's the true meaning.
You should got the mitzvot.
Ah, yeah. Well, the context of the the Seder night doesn't really fit in that. There's lots of mitzvot, but what do you call somebody who's what do we say in English? Observant, Torah observant, Orthodox Jew. Shomer mitzvot. He keeps the commandments, right? It's shmirat mitzvot, but that's not really that's a drasha. That's like a reading of the verse, which is more on the level of a hint. This is a hint, but really the simple understanding is that the way the Torah is supposed to be read is you should guard the matzot. How do you guard the matzot? We're starting to say that. I think I mentioned the other day. My brother's brother-in-law went to the Ukraine to guard his matzot. He went to make sure that from the moment it was cut off, it was harvested, no water got in, and now he's going to be sell shmura matzah for a much higher price because he has to pay for the price to the Ukraine. I think he has to pay for the danger to going into a war zone. No, there was no war then, but there's all sorts of costs involved. But we're going to see more details. Someone had a question here before I go into
The harvesting of the wheat is made by hand.
Oh, so that's another question. It doesn't have to be. It depends, obviously, in efficiency, how much you're harvesting. It's fine to use what you're touching on, though, the question that you're touching on is everything we've been talking now is pretty technical. Guarding it to make sure that no water falls in and no chametz, no leavening happens. But what about your intention? Do you require any intention? So when you eat the matzah, there's lots of things you should be thinking of. Primarily, I'm doing this for the sake of the mitzvah. The question is, how far back do we say that you have to have intention? Do you have to? Hopefully, we're going to take you to a matzah baking factory to see hands-on how they do it. They're very careful to keep the water separate from the flour until the moment that they mix it in and make the dough, and then within 18 minutes they get the whole batch done, and then they shut everything down and clean it all off and start over again. This is, but one thing you'll see is that the people working there, there's big signs on every wall, and sometimes they're singing to themselves, sometimes they're just grumbling. But what they should be saying is, I'm doing this for the sake of making matzot for the mitzvah. The shem matzat mitzvah, for the sake of a matzah that's going to be eaten for the sake of a mitzvah. And that intention is, how critical is it? Essentially, that's what Thomas is asking, right? Do you have to have intention when you're kneading the dough and baking the matzah? Do you have to have intention when you're guarding the kernels, guarding the flour, guarding the kernels? Do you have to have intention that when you're harvesting, that the harvesting is for the sake of the mitzvah of matzah? We are usually stringent when it comes to the special matzah for the first night. You asked me what's the difference. Mm-hmm. So far we've said two differences. One is the how much guarding has been done, how much shmirah from the moment of harvest, and secondly, perhaps this idea that you have to have in mind when you're making it, perhaps at all the different stages of making the matzah, you have to have in mind that you are doing it for the sake of a mitzvah, not just taking any grain and then later on say, oh, I'll use this for matzah. You're really intending it from the very beginning of the harvest for it to be for the sake of the matzah, right? Yeah. And I'll just finish. And that's why your question comes in. Does it have to be done by hand? Because if a machine is doing it, who's having the intention? So some people say the guy who pushes the button. He pushes the button for the intention of the mitzvah, so then the machine works, all based on his agency. That can be good enough. Other people say, no. If you have to have the intention, you have to be doing it by hand, so that the person has the intention. And that's the long answer to your very short question. Do you have to have intention or not? Or do you have to do it by hand, or do you have to do it with a machine? And we'll see that it's a debate. That's another difference. We're going to see also about the baking of the matzahs. We said that everybody's saying to themselves, this is for the sake of the matzah, before they get their break after 18 minutes, right? That's when you're making matzahs by hand. Do you have to have hand matzah? Maybe most of us eat matzah made by a machine. It's much more efficient and cheaper, therefore, almost like 10 times the price. Wow. To have it anything done by hand, it's a very very precise process and very labor intensive. And some people say you have to have hand matzah because of this idea of intention. And
the size will be the same.
The truth is, it's a good convention. Most matzahs made by hand are
bigger,
round. And most matzahs they can have different sizes of round, but most matzahs made in a machine are square. They're square, and they come in plastic. They weren't grown in plastic, but they do. They are packaged as such. Hopefully, that your round ones, the hand matzahs, will also be packaged in plastic to keep them fresh. But we're going to discuss that presently. Whether they have to, you have to have hand matzahs. My custom is it looks really nice, traditional round matzahs for the Seder night. The rest of the week, I eat the machine matzahs. It became a big debate when they came up with these machines. It wasn't too long ago, 200 years ago, 150 years ago, the first machine-made matzahs. Massive debate between the rabbis until today. Some people don't eat machine matzahs. They think it's too dangerous. There might be chametz in there. And other rabbis say, are you kidding? These machines they do nowadays, they're better than the hand matzahs. We can clean them better. It's a more streamlined process. It's faster, and it saves a lot of money too. So most people do eat machine matzahs. But the first night, not only do you want shmura matzah, you also want hand matzah, maybe because the hand, you'll have a higher level of intention. But we're going to get to that in a minute. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Yes, Yossi.
I mean, you can't have non-Jewish workers helping you make matzah for Pesach.
Correct.
It all has to be done by Jews, even if there's an increase of demand.
Correct. If it's not for the sake of the mitzvah, for the other 6 days, the machine can do it. Doesn't have to have. But once you're baking matzot, once you're baking matzot, then you want it to be kosher also for the first night. You don't want a label that says, don't use these on the first night. So pretty much all the matzot, we are careful that they have the intention required, and that's why it has to be done by a Jew for the sake of a mitzvah. Okay, anyways, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's read a little more. David, take it away. Matzah shmura matzah, page 164, the bottom of the page.
Was it ideally?
Yeah, ideally.
Ideally, the wheat that we will use for the matzot should be guarded from when it is harvested. It is customary to harvest the wheat while it is still a bit moist, but if they were to dry out completely and then get drenched by rain, it would become chametz. Similarly, later on, the grains must be stored where they will not come into contact with water.
By the way, a few years ago there was a miracle. There's lots of miracles every day, but we don't always notice them. And that is that I think it was towards fall time. I'm trying to remember exactly when it was, but people were going down south near the Gaza border. That's where there's still some Jewish farmers that actually grow wheat. And they were checking out the wheat to see how much it had matured for the sake of their matzah for the next year.
Really?
Yeah, and they're walking through the field to see, how ripe it is and what's the perfect time to get it while it's still a little bit moist. It's not totally dried out. And then these are rabbis, right? They're walking through the field, and one of them looks to his neighbor, and he's gone. What? He disappeared. What happened? A tunnel. Exactly.
Oh, really?
He fell into a tunnel, and that's how they discovered that there was an entire tunnel system of the Hamas terrorists that were tunneling in from Gaza. And they told the IDF, and they, mapped it all out. And of course, in true IDF tradition, they did nothing until finally, when the right time came, and then they were well aware of what was going on, and they took care of business. Now there's a big barrier underneath the ground. I think it's like 20 meters deep, at least, maybe more, of cement on the border between Gaza and Israel. underground with sensors and all sorts of things.
20 meters.
Yeah. Extreme. They're very, very expensive security wall, because they were using the tunnels against us. A horrible thing. They kidnapped a soldier many years ago and held him for ransom, and so it was a bad scene. And then, of course, they could have attacked innocent people sleeping in their beds. There were tunnels from all the way to Gaza, like a kilometer long, 2 kilometers long, coming up in the middle of a yeshuv. Somebody could be sleeping in their beds. All of a sudden, the Hamas terrorist comes out from underneath the ground. Scary business, this whole tunnel warfare. But some of it was discovered in the merit of this mitzvah of harvesting the wheat for the matzah and checking it out. Okay, unfortunately, there's a lot of tunnels also in the north. Hezbollah learned, or one taught the other. And we're more aware of it than we were before. Hopefully we're doing something about it. Enough. I imagine the people in charge will be doing a good job. I apologize for my cynicism before. But ultimately, there are a lot of very good people taking care of us in the IDF. Baruch Hashem. Okay, continue. One must also...
One may also fulfill the mitzvah of eating shmura matzah with matzot that were guarded from the time the wheat was ground into flour. As long as the wheat kernels showed no signs of becoming chametz, and nothing has happened that would undermine the presumption that they are not chametz, one need not be concerned that they had become wet and became chametz. However, this is not the best kind of shmura matzah, since it was guarded from only the time of grinding. In extenuating circumstances, when flour that has been guarded from the time of grinding, from the time of grinding is also available. One may buy. I said not right.
Is not also not available. One may buy
regular flour and fulfill the mitzvah by guarding the dough from the time of kneading. Even where it is customary to rinse grains of wheat lightly before grinding them, it is still permissible in extenuating circumstances to buy regular flour in the market, since a brief rinse is presumed not to be enough to cause the grains to become chametz. However, where it is customary to briefly soak the grains in water, one may not buy flour for matzah in the market, since it is presumed to be chametz. Therefore, in practice, one should not buy flour that is not certified kosher for Pesach, since the wheat is often soaked in water and may have become chametz.
I think I mentioned this too before, the debate whether current practices in processing wheat into flour, and they do rinse them, but perhaps it doesn't enable them to become chametz. Usually the halacha follows the standard is we do not use regular flour. We only use special flour that had extra measure of guarding. In practice, today's custom
is to be scrupulous about shmura matzah. Matzot that have been guarded from the time of grinding are used to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah on the Seder night. This practice has taken root so thoroughly that people have come to call matzah that has been guarded only from the time of grinding non-shmura matzah, even though it is considered shmura halachically, and one may use it to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah.
Right, so you could see there's different stages of guarding, from the harvest, from the grinding, and from the kneading.
I don't understand why the matzah, especially the shmura matzah, is why is the regular matzah not kosher for the Seder night? I mean, we already discussed it.
He says it is. He says it is.
Shouldn't we have like the same measurement also for the regular matzah on during the whole week? They also have to be
yes,
matzah?
Yeah. The extra guarding, which the pasuk says, "Ushmartem et hamatzot," refers specifically to the obligation, which devolves only on the first night. That's what we said in section 1, right? So, because the guarding is specifically mentioned regarding that matzah for the first night of mitzvah, of the positive commandment to eat the matzah, so we give it an extra guarding. But the question is what's considered standard, what's considered extra. So here Rabbi Melamed says even the regular is considered to be guarded, but our custom is to be extra scrupulous, and we like to pay more money. The truth is, out of all the different issues on Pesach, this is the one that I've been going more and more in recent years, be more machmir on. I'm usually not machmir. I don't look for stringencies. That's not my style. But of all the Pesach questions, I've been telling you tips, and not how to cut corners, but how to know what the halacha is and not do what's not necessary, because it'll drive you crazy. Of all the laws about Pesach, this one makes the most sense to me. I eat shmura matzah. I try to eat shmura matzah all week long, because it really does guard. Make sure that there's no chametz from the moment it was harvested. And if you look in the industrial, the way the wholesaling works, they're transporting these grains from place to place. We mentioned the trucks. We mentioned it could rain. We mentioned, the sanitation is different in different places. It makes sense to have shmura matzah all week long, just to make extra special sure that they're kosher. But you don't have to. And why I say maybe this is a good one to be machmer? It doesn't cost that much more. I'm not talking about hand versus machine. There's something called machine-made matzahs that are shmura. The difference in shmura and non-shmura is how much guarding they were done. What flour are you using? Using flour that was guarded from wheat that was guarded from the time of harvesting or from later on. And I think for an extra 20 shekels, an extra 30 shekels, how much matzah do I eat? I don't eat a lot of matzah, but for 1 week, 20, 30 shekels, that's a very easy chumrah to take upon myself. And it does make sense that, there's you really making sure that there's no chametz kernels that were mixed in. But it's not an obligation. It's not an obligation. The first night, though, you should try to get shmura matzah. Yes, please.
Could you use a machine to replace someone for the sake of guarding the matzah?
Yes. Cameras are being used, and it makes a lot of sense. Although for that's more relevant when it comes to kashrut. You have to supervise to make sure that the wrong person doesn't get involved. But how can you really guard? Well, I guess you could have a sensor of rain.
A sensor of humidity.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, by all means, I think that would be kosher for guarding the matzah. But as I said, I don't think it's an intention. Here, that's the next section. Does the guarding have to be with the intent to fulfill a mitzvah? Yossi, read it for us, please. Yes, let's see.
Guarding the matzot to be used for fulfilling the mitzvah of eating matzah on the Seder night has two implications: being extra vigilant to prevent it from becoming chametz, and having the intention that the matzah is to be used for the mitzvah.
L'shem matzat mitzvah.
It is therefore necessary that the matzah be kneaded and baked by Jews who are halachic adults, who can be relied upon both to guard against fermentation and to keep in mind that their actions are for the sake of matzah mitzvah. One may not employ Gentiles, minors, or mentally unfit workers to knead or bake matzah, since they cannot be relied upon to have the proper intent. Some dispute the implication above. In their opinion, the mitzvah of guarding the matzah requires extra vigilance to prevent the mitzvah from becoming chametz, but requires no special intent while doing it. Thus, Gentiles and minors are fit to bake matzah mitzvah as long as an adult Jew supervises their work, ensuring that they work with alacrity and that the dough does not become chametz.
In practice,
at the time of kneading, one should take care to fulfill both meanings of guarding. Thus, one must insist that Jews knead and bake the matzah mitzvah, taking care that the dough does not become chametz, and intending that the matzah be for the sake of the mitzvah. However, at the time of harvesting and grinding, the first meaning is sufficient. Thus, the wheat may be harvested and ground by Gentiles as long as a Jew stands nearby and supervises their work, ensuring that it does not become chametz. In Chatchila, one should say out loud when starting to work on Matsuot that all the work is being done for the sake of producing Matzah mitzvah. But the Eved, it is sufficient that he thought it's inflicted he should have in mind that it is for the Matsuot mitzvah that one eats on Seder night, but if he had in mind that it is for Matzah for Pesach, he has fulfilled the obligation.
Okay.
That was a lot of back and forth in this.
The bottom line is it's a matter of debate, and we're lenient when it comes to guarding the first stages, and you don't have to have intent as long as it's being done properly. But when it comes to kneading the matzah, actual baking process, we're machmir, and that you have to have someone who can have intent for the sake of the mitzvah.
What about if you bought like a whole factory or rented it just for the sake of making the matzah, for the sake of those last 2 days? Could you then consider, no matter what goes on in the work, as long as it's kept to the regulations,
right?
And since the entire factory has been made for the sake of the first 2 nights, then it's done with the intent.
Right, it's a good question. I think that we have to go deeper into the analysis of how much intent is required. Maybe that overall intent is good enough. It's a good way of thinking. We have to do some more in-depth study to get an answer that's clear cut. I think the practice is we're machmer. We want the people to. Some people say it at the beginning of the day. Some people say it every few minutes, like I was describing to you, so that during the entire process, that they should be extra careful that the matzah is kosher for this mitzvah of eating the matzah. I want to take a break from the technical matters we've been discussing and ask you to open up to page 8, please.
8.
Page 8. Yes. If I'm not mistaken, we skipped it a little bit because we wanted to get into the actual mitzvot. But it's always good to think a little bit about the meaning of the mitzvot and not forget why we're doing all this. Page 8. Moshe, you're on. At the bottom of the page, it says the meaning of matzah.
The meaning of matzah. Matzah, symbolizing our recognition that the spiritual roots of things are beyond our grasp, even though God granted us the ability to operate within and improve the world, is the opposite of chametz. Therefore, on Pesach, when we are not engaged with the most fundamental elements of faith, we do not.
When we are engaged
with the most fundamental elements of faith, we do not mix even one iota of chametz in our food. We eat only matzah, which remains simple and thin throughout its baking, without going through any additional process of swelling. Through our humility before God expressed in the matzah, we internalize the faith, first revealed at the Exodus from Egypt, that God actively watches over the world and elected Israel. To be sure, there were elite individuals who believed in God even before the Exodus, but their connection with the divine was of a personal nature. The wholeness of faith was first revealed only at the Exodus, with the formation of a complete nation, containing all strata of society destined to manifest God's name in the world. Matzah comes to remind us of faith and is therefore called the food of faith by the Zohar.
Mechla the mehemnuta. Mechla is like ochel. Mehemnuta is like emunah. It's the food of faith. The food of faith. Matzah is called the food of faith. Faith food. Not fish food. Faith food.
Soul food?
Food. That's soul food. You could call it the soul food. The Jewish soul food. The food that reminds us of the faith. By eating matzah,
on the Seder night with the proper intent, one achieves faith, and by eating matzah all 7 days of Pesach, one implants that faith firmly in one's heart. Since matzah signifies faith, it is understandable that its entire manufacturing process must be performed very meticulously, as we will learn below. This is because the roots of all things depend on faith, and any small flaw in faith can cause tremendous destruction in the world. We can thus understand why the nation of Israel came into being as slaves in Egypt. All other nations develop naturally, from the ground up, from family to clan to tribe to nation. As they grow, they develop cultures that evolve out of the circumstances of their lives, the climate of their territories, and their conflicts with their neighbors. As part of the emergence of their culture, they develop some type of deistic belief. Since human beings are involved in their invention, such beliefs are idolatrous. In contrast, Israel became a nation as slaves, devoid of any culture. They could not develop their own culture while enslaved and lacking national self-esteem. At the same time, Egyptian culture was foreign to them and possibly despised by them, as it was associated with their tormentors. Israel was thus a tabula rasa.
what's that mean? Blank
Cleared out.
slate.
Yeah.
English translation to Latin.
Oh, it's
Blank slate.
Yes.
Rasa is like erased, Tabula is table, so it's like a slate,
It was Hebrew.
a blank piece of paper. They were fresh, fresh with they had no of their own culture, and they didn't want to have anything to do with Egyptian culture. They were free. Go ahead, of preconceived.
Free of preconceived notions, and perfectly capable of absorbing the true faith based on divine revelation and accepting the Torah without introducing human considerations into its fundamental principles. The impoverished, unembellished matzah alludes to the condition of the Israelites at that time.
Yeah, so this matzah is matzah of faith. It's so hard. Nowadays, we live in a society more than ever in the human history. There's more atheists than ever. People that don't have faith. And people are losing their faith left and right. Luckily, people are also gaining their faith left and right. There's always movement, and that's a natural thing. But if you want to strengthen your faith and be true to what it means to be a Jew, which is why we're here, then eating the matzah on Pesach is a very strong practice, very symbolic. Can you imagine eating? I've heard of superfoods before. What's a superfood? Right? Gives you lots of nutrients or something like that. Right? There's certain types of foods where the nutritionists tell you, oh, if you eat that, you get lots of vitamin D and calcium and B and C and the whole alphabet. That's a superfood. So this is the superfood of the soul, right? It gives you so much vitamins. Vitamin E, vitamin emunah, or F, vitamin faith. And eating the matzah, the vitamin F, this is the vitamin E. It's good for the bones and for your soul. So this is the one way of interpretation of, why we're so careful about the matzah. It's such a big deal. Of course, the first night we're actually commemorating the Exodus, and the rest, the entire 7 days as well. It's an extension of that. And he quotes here Rabbi Tzadok, a Kohen from Lublin, that by eating matzah all 7 days, one implants that faith firmly in one's heart. Makes sense to have more matzah, even if it's not obligatory. Each time, if you think about it, it can be a affirmation of your faith. Okay, we'll stop here. B'ezrat Hashem, we'll continue the laws of matzah and how to eat it, not only to bake it, tomorrow. B'ezrat Hashem.